Morning, everybody. Happy hump day. Welcome to the news agenda. Welcome back after our half-term break and some unforeseen technical issues this morning. Sorry we're late. I'm Fleet Street Fox, and today I'm joined by the Mirror's North East reporter, Jeremy Armstrong. Morning, Jez.
Good morning.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Now, this is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments, ask us your questions. We will do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening on podcast will just have to ask yourselves whether anything at all has changed while we've been away. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on a grieving mum who spent years fighting for justice for her daughter who took her own life after her benefits were cut. She's warning Keir Starmer that his proposed cuts will kill people. More on that in depth in a bit. But first, I want to take us to the Algarve, where Jeremy and I both spent our fair share of time about 18 years ago covering the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann from her holiday home in Praia da Luz. Now, today, there are fresh investigations underway and digging going on around the former home of a suspect. And Jeremy, as our colleague Martin Fricker, who probably spent the most time of any reporter out there, says in the paper today, this is tinged with a little bit of desperation this time. Why is that?
Yes, I mean, I think you have to deduce that, having said he was the prime suspect 5 years ago, and you know, he's just about to be released in September, that it is a final throw of the dice in order to try and get the evidence that they need to charge him, really. He's been, as I say, he's been described as a prime suspect for years. They've been out to his properties in Germany. They're obviously now searching in the Algarve, and I think what they're endeavouring to do is just try and copper bottom all the leads that they've got in order to see if they can find something before. I mean, you know, depending on which estimate you believe, he could potentially be freed either in September, which is when he served all his time, or more likely, as Martin was saying in the paper today, February, where he has to serve time in lieu of the fines which have been imposed, and he hasn't been able to, unfortunately, to pay the fines. Fortunate in the sense that it keeps him in longer, but you know, if he is able to do that before September, then he walks in September.
So what do you think, everybody? This is Christian Brookner. He's a convicted paedophile and rapist who's serving time in Germany. How do you feel about the fresh digging that's going on? Are they going to find anything after 18 years? And it does seem to be a little bit hit and miss. Christian Brookner was known to be living in the area, about a 10-minute drive from Praia da Luz, in an abandoned farmhouse and with a camper van as well. And they're searching around that farmhouse and other places. You can see there in the images, you know, it's really tumbled down and fallen apart these days. It's been a long time since anybody was living around there. And they're searching in disused wells and disused buildings, trying to find any trace of what might have happened to Madeleine. They're taking soil samples, there's dogs, there's radar equipment, there's all sorts. It's being done at the request of the German police, helped by the Portuguese police, who've received a request to help with the digging. And, you know, Christian Brookner's associates and an ex-girlfriend of his have all said over the past 5 years, haven't they, Jeremy, that they suspected him of this abduction and murder of Madeleine. He's about to be released after coming to the end of his sentence for raping a woman not far away from here, I think. And the German police really have done everything they can to try to keep him in prison, haven't they? Because he is a dangerous man, whether he killed Madeleine or not. He's a very dangerous, very horrible man. They don't want him on the outside, but they've gone to huge lengths, even to the extent of trying to, you know, extend his sentence, which you covered, didn't you?
Yeah, I did the trial last year, which went on for months and months and months on end, which is a very unusual situation where he's been effectively accused of offences which were committed in Portugal, and actually had a CCTV link to the court in Germany in order to try and get him, to try and get his sentence extended, that he was found not guilty of those charges. And I think you can see that there's a kind of chronology there, isn't there? So, they've gone through the potential of extending his sentence in Germany by trying to find him guilty of these accusations in Portugal, which didn't work for a variety of different reasons. A lot of it was anecdotal, very, very historic. Part of the problem with this, obviously, is that one's talking about it's 18 years on that they're doing these searches. I mean, that is an awful long time. That is an awful long time to be trying to find anything either forensically or more, substantive than that. So there's no two ways about it. It is a final throw of the dice, and you've also got to ask the question: if he does get released this time, and he does manage to get out of custody, will he ever be seen again? Because I sense that he's had years and years and years to think about what he's going to do, and he won't be sticking around in Germany. That's for sure.
No, exactly. And there's this suggestion as well. I mean, when he comes out, he's going to have a target on his back, not just from journalists who want to speak to him. I'll probably be offering, some of them I expect, not us, I would hope, but there's quite some organisations, especially in Europe, might be offering him big money to sit down and do an interview about this. Christian Brookner has always denied having anything to do with Madeleine's disappearance. He has given some interviews behind bars, but after he comes out, he's going to also be targeted, I'd have thought, by vigilantes, by conspiracy theorists, because, the disappearance of Madeleine caused so much emotion and attention and sort of combined madness in the world. Are the German police, do you think, or anyone, wherever he might have to go, are they going to have to put some kind of measures in place to protect him?
I mean, if he goes abroad, I think it's highly unlikely. And the other thing is that he's not going to cooperate with them, is he? Because obviously he's aware of the fact that they've been endeavouring to extend his sentence for years, and have also identified him as a suspect in the most notorious crime probably the world has seen in recent history. So the notion that he's going to cooperate with police while he's on the outside, I think, is highly, highly, highly unlikely. Yeah,
he's just going to take off somewhere where there's perhaps no extradition, no chance of being found, somewhere where a strange man living in a camper van can just disappear, which may well be what he was trying to do. But of course, it's a different world than it was when he first went into jail. And certainly a different world than 18 years ago. It's far more difficult, so I'd have thought, to get across border controls and so on without being noticed these days. But we'll have to see what happens there, whether he comes out in September, whether he comes out in February, and what they find in Pride de Luz. But I suppose while all this is going on, there are two young adults, Madeleine's younger twin brother and sister, who were only babies at the time that she disappeared, and her parents, Kate and Jerry, are all trying to get on with life as best they can, no doubt also trying not to imagine what might or might not be found on this dig. It's a very long shot, all this, Jeremy, digging by the German police in places where they think someone who might have had something to do with it might have been once. Yeah. It's not exactly well targeted, is it? Do you think Kate and Jerry and the family are ever going to find out what happened to Madeleine?
Goodness me, there's a question. I mean, I think, if you analyse what we've just stated there about 18 years later, and the fact that they haven't been able to pinpoint evidence where they can bring this guy to trial, if you contextualise all of that, you would have to say that everything feels like it's a kind of a very long shot, really, to be honest. Now, the only thing that kind of counterbalances that, I think, is whether this is targeted in the sense that they've received new intelligence as a result of all of that activity around the investigation into the previous allegations in Portugal. The one thing one can say about the German police is that they are really, really, desperately trying to find some sort of breakthrough. And I think you have to give them credit for that. Going public with his name, which they did via their equivalent of Crime Watch 5 years ago, identifying, naming him as the chief suspect, trying to get that. I mean, that's all obviously at risk of stating the obvious. That publicity is all about trying to get somebody to tell them something that might give them a breakthrough. And to be fair to them, if they haven't got any intelligence, at least they're trying to copper bomb every single possible avenue. I mean, as you know, they've already searched through a lake. They're now going through wells. They're now going through properties that he was linked to. The problem is with him, as you would expect, he was on the real. I'm talking about the periphery of society. I mean, he was staying in houses that didn't belong to him. He was, he lived in a caravan for a while. His house in Germany was like on a,
Oh, I think we've lost some of Jeremy's signal there. He's recently moved home himself. He's on the edge of society, isn't he, as a journalist? And he hasn't got the broadband yet. So his signal is coming and going. So I'll witter on until he manages to tune back in. But I think what he's saying really is that, Brookner is someone who was really a recluse from society as a whole, perhaps because of his predilections. And it was very difficult to trace and track and to know exactly where he was and what he was doing. And so it's very difficult to figure some of that out. Sorry, Jeremy, you're back now. I was just explaining.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry, I must have dropped out. Yeah, as I was saying, I think to give full credit to the German authorities, they are trying every avenue. It's just as you've just said, unfortunately, a lot of it does feel like a long shot. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, I've always thought. I mean, we hear so many stories about bodies that are found many, many years later in all kinds of strange places by incident and accident. And I do tend to think that if there is a body for Madeleine, that it will be found at some point. But when and how, I think, I'm more inclined to think it'll turn up by accident somewhere, rather than something that, because if they were going to find it, if there was going to be a witness or someone who could help or someone who have good information, they'd probably have found it by now. But anyway, we do have more witnesses that have come forward as a result of Christian Brookner, the publicity around Christian Brookner. So maybe there'll be even more as a result of the digs. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? But now on to the big story of the day, at least as far as the Mirror is concerned. And that is a front page story about a ruling by a coroner that a woman named Jodie Whiting took her own life after being told her benefits were cut as part of Tory austerity in 2017. Now, that coroner has ruled that the suicide was due to those benefit cuts. It was down to the Department for Work and Pensions wrongly sending her a letter saying that her benefits were going to be removed. Now, Jeremy, can you take us through this a bit? Because Jodie's story's been in the Mirror an awful lot over the past 8 years. Who was Jodie? For those who didn't know, why did she get such a letter?
So it was a letter that was sent out. She hadn't turned up for an appointment. I don't even remember back in the dog days. It was 2017. Back into 2016, actually, when she received the letter into 2017, she was in hospital receiving treatment. A letter arrived saying that she'd missed an appointment for her benefits sort of assessment, which they used to have in those days. She had all sorts of things wrong with her, curvature of the spine. She had various kind of mental health issues. She was on medication. She was deemed to be fit to work in her absence because she didn't turn up for the appointment. The letter was only discovered when she got out of hospital, where they discovered a cyst on her brain, amongst other things. She then panicked because the problem in those days was that when you lost one benefit, which was the employment support allowance, you lost everything else in terms of help with council tax and all of that. And our mum said that there was just a kind of a turning point in terms of her mental fragility. She just could not comprehend how she was going to survive without all those benefits, and that's what led to taking her life. And the most incredible thing about this is she's had to go all the way to the Court of Appeal in order to get a second inquest. The first one lasted 37 minutes. It ruled that she committed suicide. None of that context was put, but was put before the coroner. And our mum's gone. She lost the initial appeal. She went to the court. She then had to go to the Court of Appeal and succeeded. And it's now, it's 8 years later, and she's managed to get the second inquest, which has actually found exactly what she said was the case in the first instance, i.e. that this mishandling of her daughter's case in terms of her benefits led to her death.
Yeah, and she is told in the story there today, but she, when she it's an awful morning when they went in to find her body, and she remembers her granddaughter being sort of held back at the door screaming, and she went in and identified her daughter, and she made a promise then and there. She knew straight away what had happened, and she made a promise to Jodie then and there that she would get justice. And it's taken a best part of a decade, and the process of overturning inquests is not an easy one. It really could be a lot easier than it is, and she went through all of that. Now, what do you think, everybody? How do you feel about these were Tory cuts in 2017, coming to the end of the austerity period, really, after the Brexit referendum. I think Theresa May was probably Prime Minister at the time. So many prime ministers ago now. But it was the same kind of idea that benefits were being taken by people who didn't have a right to them, and that they must be cut and axed, and they must be made to work if they could work. And if you don't turn up to your assessment, then you lost everything, as we've just heard there about Jodie. Do you think that's a fair and reasonable thing to do? Do you think more of that is needed, or do you think less of it's needed? With stories like Jodie, it's pretty easy to say the other way around, but I'm sure there'll be people out there who will say that, well, despite this, there are so many cases of fraud, that is almost justified to treat people this harshly. Now, there was a horrid error axing her benefits after she missed this appointment, when her conditions were such that, when she was in hospital anyway, but even if she hadn't been, she could barely crawl out of the house some days. And her mum, Joy Dove, tells our colleague Roswyn Jones in the paper about that morning where she found her daughter's body, and she was surrounded by bits of paper that detailed her disintegrating mental state, and that she sort of left littered all around her body. They had words like debt, debt, debt scrawled on them, and please look after my babies, because she had children. Now, Joy vowed to her daughter that she'd get justice. She blamed the DWP from the outset, as we said, but it's not. I mean, obviously there was a mistake there, but it's not necessarily the DWP as an institution that's at fault, or even the people in it. As Labour said repeatedly at the time, this was down to Tory policies, government policies by the Conservative government of the day to cut benefits no matter what. They just want to cut the benefit bill. The politician at the top said that, and it trickles down through the system, and it trickled right down to Jodie. That's kind of fundamentally what happened, isn't it, Jeremy?
It is, yeah. It is. I'm afraid it is. When you have these, I think it was, I did a succession of stories, actually, Susie, because the policy was so, it was so tough on the benefit claimants, and not turning up for appointments was deemed to be, was deemed to be so evasive that you lost all your benefits, and for people who are incredibly vulnerable, and as she was, and in a mental situation where they can't handle that kind of stress, this is what happens, unfortunately, in the most extreme cases. So I'd like to think that the said at the inquest that more compassion will be introduced into the system, and that they weren't doing that anymore. And obviously there's a balance there, isn't it? And that's what one needs, really.
Yeah, well, you'd hope so. But what do you think, everybody? Do you think there needs to be more balance in the system? Do you think the system needs to be harsher or fairer? Or are we spending too much on benefits? Or are we not spending enough? Because, Joy campaigned years for this inquest, including at Labour Party conference, and with support from the Mirror throughout. Roswyn Jones has written about her time and time again in her paper. There were Labour shadow ministers and politicians repeatedly standing alongside her on platforms and commenting on her behalf, saying in opposition how the cruelty of austerity was responsible for Jodie's death, and really making political hay out of it. And it's a perfectly valid point. Nothing wrong with that, right? It would seem that they had it absolutely right. But now in power, some of those same politicians are telling us that there will be new benefit cuts on top of these ones, which were introduced by the Tories, and that these ones aren't austerity, that these ones are done with care, that they're out of concern to help the disabled into work, and that will mean more fairness in the system. Now, they're not talking about bringing back some of the harsh rules that the Tories had, but they are talking about some massive cuts. Louis says the hitting of the sick and disabled will lead to more lives lost. Politicians won't care, and the World Economic Forum wants the population cutting. I don't know that the World Economic Forum is having a big impact on the budget, but we'll have to wait and see. Steve says, where will all these jobs for people with disabilities come from? There's kind of the point, right? And which often gets me wound right up, Jeremy. How is this going to work on the ground? Because if you have your benefits cut, whether you have, as Jodie did, a curved spine, whether you have personality disorder, as Jodie also did, or whether you have something like epilepsy, like I have, which does not really affect my daily life, but is something which can just get worse without any part of me whatsoever. If you want to go and get a job, you know, little miss curvature of the spine isn't going to get the same job opportunities as someone who doesn't have a curved spine and doesn't have to crawl out of the house on her hands and knees. Someone with epilepsy doesn't get offered the same job as someone who doesn't have epilepsy and who can, you know, stay up later and travel further and do more night shifts and things like that. How is it going to work? If this is helping the disabled into work, how do the disabled gain from having less money to support themselves?
I mean, the answer is that they don't. The argument would be, and you would hope that, you know, a Labour government is more compassionate than the predecessor, that you create more opportunities in society and that everybody benefits and it trickles down. It's a kind of Keynesian argument in terms of economics and improving it. The most important thing, I think, the only thing one can do is to introduce more compassion to the benefit system so that doesn't happen again. And I think the great thing about this one woman's crusade is that it has highlighted the issue. And as so often happens with these things, it's the individual case study that really brings into focus, you know, the broader issues. And I sincerely hope that's what she's done. I personally feel that she has achieved that, and that somehow that will impact upon the system. But you have to say that, you know, all of those things that you've just described are you know, issues for successive governments, aren't they? They're always going to be the case, and all one can do and all one can hope for really is a compassionate system which looks after the most vulnerable in society, because that's the mark of a civilized society, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, as Steve says, compassion first and enforcement later. JC says those who have less than others will always be the target because they can defend themselves less from change than you or I can. It's one of those things where, unfortunately, this attitude towards the deserving and the undeserving poor, and when we see someone like Jodie's story, we go, well, she is the deserving, right? She has so many conditions, she plainly needs some help. But if you were to find the person in the DWP who sent that letter, I bet you find someone who is doing 15 jobs for very low wage after everyone else has been cut, who is following a rule that says you don't turn up for your meeting, you get a letter, and that there is no leeway in the system, and that rule has been set by someone up high above, and they're being made to do it because you're not hitting your targets of cutting benefits and all the rest of it, and it goes all the way up to the top of the tree in the end. And it's the machinery, it's the people who build that machinery and who set that system. And then when the people go into it with their own individual idiosyncratic disabilities or abilities, the machine and the people people just get minced up, and it doesn't actually help anybody. I was doing a TV thing a little while ago, and I made the point of saying, why don't you just give a cut to national employers in national insurance contributions for disabled staff, because then you find it might be easier for disabled people to get employed if it's going to cut the total overall wages bill for employers if they get some kind of benefit out of it themselves. You integrate people in society, you make disabled people more able to work, more able to save, less reliant on benefits. You make them less stigmatized, all the rest of it. And the Labour leader in the Lords, Baroness Smith, turned around to me and said, well, it's not that simple. And I said, isn't it? Isn't it? I think it might be just that simple. One of the things that is going to be cut in this new round of cuts that we're promised is the rate for new disability claimants. So you will only get, if you are a new disability, you will only get half of what you would have got last year for exactly the same condition when you become freshly recognised as disabled and unable to work. And what most people forget is that most people aren't born disabled. It's something that comes on later in life and often through no fault of your own. Most disabilities can't be seen, and most of them go up and down in terms of your ability to work. So something like rheumatoid arthritis, if you were to develop later this year something like a chronic medical condition like rheumatoid arthritis, heart failure, diabetes, epilepsy, lots of things that might not even be linked to, lifestyle or anything else. Maybe if you're in a car accident and you just suddenly get a spinal problem, you will only get half the help that you would have done last year in order to keep a roof over your head and to keep yourself alive. Now, Jeremy, the Labour view has always been that you can't punish the disabled into work. That was their view when they stood on the platform next to Joy when she was talking about her daughter. You cannot punish the disabled into work, they said. Are these cuts going to offer the support people really need for the medical conditions that they just can't control?
I mean, cuts are never going to do that, are they? So you're left with a quandary, I think, Susie, where you've got to get a system which is, I mean, what you were talking about with Jodie, that was an automatic letter that was sent out, so you're right what you said. It just automatically was sent out because she missed her appointment, so there was no compassion, written into the system there. That goes without saying. They've got a real dilemma on their hands. There's no two ways about it, because if you're looking to cut the benefits bill, and you introduce rules like that, like these automatic letters going out and people being denied benefits in a kind of in a broad sweep like that, without taking into account individual circumstances, this will continue. There will be other Jodies in the system, because you can't treat people like that with that kind of carte blanche, I don't think.
No, well, we have, and we are, and we probably will keep doing so. And it's interesting to note that the attitude of the deserving and the undeserving poor actually started under Henry VIII, right, with his poor laws and shutting down the monasteries. That was where it started, the idea that everyone who was sick and everyone who was poor was somehow on the take. Before then, people were quite nice to people who are poor and unwell, not afterwards. Leslie says the pointless fit-to-work assessment has never found anybody a job. Changes in PIP are unnecessary, as it covers the extra expense to support disabled people who are working. How are they going to be able to afford to work without it? That's the whole point, isn't it? I suppose that disabled people want to work. I don't know anybody who's got a disability who doesn't want to work, who doesn't want to fend for themselves, who doesn't want the extra pay in their pocket. But sometimes you need the PIP because you can't work every day of the week. You have to be freelance. You can't get a job. It's very difficult. You lose jobs quite often. Steve says, I've been a staunch Labour voter for 60 years. God, well done, Steve. I thought I knew my enemy, the greedy, self-centred, corrupt Tories. Now we have the enemy within, and it's even more nauseous. Oh, dear. Steve is really talking about what I suppose is the unspoken elephant in the room here, Jeremy, which is that benefit cuts wasn't really what anybody had on their bingo card for a fresh Labour government after all the years of austerity. Jennifer agrees with Steve. She says this Labour government feels like I've waited 14 years for Christmas and all my gold was a single crusty sock. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but it's very good. A very good metaphor, Jennifer. Now, we've seen some new terms, though, haven't we? For example, the winter fuel payment being restored to most pensioners, which keeps being talked about, although it hasn't happened yet. Keir Starmer says it's because they've started saving money, and so what they have previously cut, they can now bring back. And maybe that is something we can look forward to with PIP payments in the future. In reality, though, Jeremy, it feels like, it's just a way of keeping Tory voters happy, to cut benefits and to bring back winter fuel payments for wealthier pensioners who are more likely to vote Conservative anyway, and sort of stuff the Labour voters who, like Steve and Jennifer, are going, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt he's become obsessed, hasn't he, with reform and all the indications that they're going up in the popularity stakes, if one can put it that way. All the opinion polls that have been done suggest reform are kind of on the rise. They've got 5 MPs. What really annoys me about Farage is the fact that he gets this kind of airtime really on the back of very, very limited popular support in terms of what's happened in elections. That really gets to me, because I don't think he deserves it. Having said all of that, they've made some very, very bizarre policy decisions, I think, by anybody's kind of assessment. The winter fuel allowance. I thought that was such a strange first step in terms of the message that we're sending out, and so you've just got to hope that they do listen, and they do change, and they do reform. And they do reform in a, as I say, in a way that Labour voters would expect. The heartlands would expect.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out, I think the Lib Dems have got 72 MPs. Ed Davey don't get anywhere near the attention Nigel Farage does.
I just think it's a really key issue, that, in terms of where we are and why they're doing so well in the polls, because because he's seen as box office, I suppose, to a certain extent. He's he's a good talker and all that. But if you listen to what he's saying and you look at the message that he's putting out there, it's pretty insidious, I think.
Yeah, and well, we've had some of the same things before, haven't we? Now, I think we've got a couple of questions on this to finish off with. Richard says, sanctioning the neurodivergent seems to be built into the system very conveniently. We're another one of those chronic conditions which is completely unseen, unrecognised, and therefore people don't tend to sort of necessarily get on with it. Lady Sophie, possibly not her true aristocratic title, I don't believe, unless we are attracting the nobility, says the simple way is to stop the benefits of illegal immigrants. That's how you make savings without attacking the disabled. Except, Sophie, that being an illegal immigrant doesn't necessarily mean that you would get any benefits because you're not registered anywhere. So I think what you're talking about there is asylum seekers who do register for benefits and do get some, and they get the grand total of about 30 quid a week. If you can live on 30 quid a week, do let me know how you manage it, because I think we'd all be interested. And remember, they're not actually paying the hotel bills. So it's a horrible mess, and no one really wants to think about what they ought to cut, especially at a time we're spending more and more on defence. But I think it's true to say that Labour is not quite doing what everyone expected, and they've been forgetting some stuff. Anyway, we will see how it all goes. I'm sure the Mirror and Joy are going to keep on campaigning on this point, and they're not going to forget the fact that Labour also used to do the same. Now, we have managed to find some good news in the world for you, and here it is. Now, one of the side effects of all the medical developments and scientific advances we have is that we all get to live longer. But that means we just die from something else instead. And it means that more of us are getting to suffer from dementia than we used to. And there may also be a link with modern lifestyles, air pollution, for example, or something, which lead to an increase in degenerative brain disorders, perhaps over a lifetime. Now, it's rather fantastic then that the Mirror is reporting today that there are 100 new drugs in development to halt dementia, and experts say that a global drugs review and clinical trials is showing that we are at a tipping point for fighting back successfully. This could be the moment where we're able to actually say that we can cure dementia or prevent it altogether. Jeremy, is this proof, do you think, that if people remember to focus on what help is actually needed, that they can achieve great things?
The detail of it is basically there's an awful lot of research that's going on, and in the long term, the thing that might have the start of a cure for dementia. So it's really very, very early stages on the journey. But because there is so much research being carried out simultaneously by different countries around the world, most of this is in America at the moment, and because obviously it's such a huge thing. I mean, the other aspect of it, which isn't always highlighted, is the fact that obviously what you've just said about people living longer, and this being one of the key issues in longevity. There's huge money if you can find a cure, isn't it? That's the reality. It's driven by the pharmaceutical industry endeavoring to find, drugs and medicines and potential, kind of mitigation for those factors which you've just described. There are so many different things involved, Susie. Diet, all the things that you hear about all the time in terms of looking after yourself, having a variety of food, doing lots of things that keep you mentally nimble. But this research is, to be fair, Cambridge University, the Don, who was talking about this, all the different aspects of the dementia battle going on, to try and find drugs to combat it. She's basically saying they think they're now at the start of a journey which will result in that. So not only will mitigate it, but ultimately may even cure it, which would be extraordinary, wouldn't it? Really, that's quite a statement to make. I mean, it gives hope to millions of people, I think.
It'll be fantastic, and all the research that's going on people who are suffering now is actually something that would benefit perhaps others in the future and their children and grandchildren. We'll have to wait and see when that's going to kick in. I bet you any money that even if they invented like a pill or an injection that would just cure all your problems, never have any more disabled people ever again, they would still argue that some people didn't deserve it. And some people could. But, perhaps if there is a pill to end your dementia, perhaps the Labour front bench can start taking some of them and might restore their memories. especially with regard to Jodie Whiting and nuclear test veterans and a few other things I can think of. Anyway, thank you, Jeremy, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Sorry we were late and everything. We will see you again, I think, next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Until then, stay safe, take care, keep taking the pills. Tatty bye.